the gun barrel pointed at his 8-year-old son's face. "Get that kid out of here before something bad happens," Detective Marcus Kane snarled, weapon drawn on a Tuesday morning in January 2025. Christopher Bennett stood in his own doorway wearing pajamas and a bathrobe, watching armed men flood through his suburban home. His federal credentials lay on the kitchen counter, gold badge gleaming in morning sunlight, but Kane refused to look at them. "Fake," Kane declared without examination. "These people always try something." What happened next would expose a conspiracy so deep, so systematic, that federal investigators would call it domestic terrorism. And it all started with one detective who couldn't believe a black family belonged in his wealthy white neighborhood. Tuesday, January 14th, 2025. Riverside Heights, Seattle, Washington. 2 hours earlier, Christopher Bennett's biggest concern was getting his son Nathan to finish breakfast before the school bus arrived. The house smelled of cinnamon and fresh coffee. His wife Rebecca stood at the stove, flipping French toast while humming softly to the jazz playing from the kitchen speaker. Morning sunlight streamed through their windows, casting warm squares across hardwood floors they'd saved 5 years to install. This was their sanctuary, their piece of the American dream in Riverside Heights, one of Seattle's most expensive neighborhoods. Christopher adjusted his tie, the same navy blue he wore every Tuesday for his Department of Homeland Security position downtown. Cybersecurity analyst work required precision, attention to detail, the kind of methodical thinking that served him well in protecting critical infrastructure networks. "Daddy, can you drive me today?" 8-year-old Sophia asked, syrup dripping from her fork. "Of course, princess." Christopher kissed the top of her head. "But only if you promise to show Mrs. Anderson those spelling test results." This is what they'd worked for. A 4-bedroom house in Riverside Heights. Award-winning schools. Safe streets where neighbors waved from driveways and complained about property taxes instead of crime. Christopher's phone buzzed with morning emails. Routine security updates, network maintenance schedules. Nothing classified. Nothing urgent. Just the steady rhythm of protecting digital systems most Americans never thought about. "You're going to be late," Rebecca reminded him, pecking his cheek. 5 more minutes. Christopher stole another sip of coffee, savoring these moments before the day's demands began. Nathan argued with Sophia over the last piece of French toast. Rebecca mediated with practiced patience. Normal family chaos. The beautiful mundane reality of upper-middle-class life. The neighborhood outside their windows told a story of suburban success. Manicured lawns worth thousands in annual maintenance. 3-car garages. Basketball hoops where kids like Nathan practiced after homework. Christopher had chosen this place deliberately. Safety, stability, excellent schools, a buffer between his children and the world's harder edges. His DHS badge sat beside his car keys, routine as his wallet. 12 years of federal service. Top secret clearance that required extensive FBI background checks to earn. Work that mattered. Protecting systems that kept society functioning. Christopher took pride in serving his country, even when most people never knew what he did. "Remember, I'm picking up groceries after work," Rebecca called from the kitchen. "Nathan has soccer practice at 6, Christopher added, checking his calendar. Ordinary Tuesday rhythms. School schedules. Soccer practice. Grocery runs. The beautiful mundane reality they'd built together. Christopher glanced at his watch. Still early, but he liked arriving at the office before his team. Leadership through example. His supervisor always praised Christopher's reliability, his calm analytical approach to complex security challenges. Through the window, Christopher noticed unusual activity 3 houses down. More police cars than normal. Probably another issue at the Morrison house. Every neighborhood had its problems. "Everything okay out there?" Rebecca asked, following his gaze. "Just keeping an eye on things," Christopher shrugged. Part of being a good neighbor. He finished his coffee, kissed his family goodbye, and headed toward the garage. Another day of protecting digital networks. Another evening of homework help and bedtime stories. The rhythm felt unbreakable. But sometimes the world has other plans. Christopher never made it to his car. The front door exploded inward with splintering force. Armed officers poured through like floodwater, weapons raised, overlapping shouts creating chaos. "Police! Nobody moves. Get down now." Detective Marcus Kane led the charge, his eyes scanning the room with predatory focus. When he spotted Christopher frozen by the kitchen counter, something ugly shifted in his expression. Well, well. Look what we got here. Christopher's hands rose instinctively. Officers, there's been a mistake. I live here. This is my house. Your house. Kane's laugh carried pure contempt. Right. And I'm the president. From upstairs, Sophia's scream pierced the morning air. Nathan's voice followed. Hi, terrified. Mommy. Mommy. Christopher kept his voice steady though his heart pounded. My children are scared. Can you please tell me what this is about? What's it about? Kane stepped closer, weapon still drawn. It's about criminals thinking they can hide in neighborhoods they can't afford. Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs, both children clinging to her nightgown. Her face went white at the scene below. Ma'am, keep those kids upstairs, Officer Rodriguez called out, gentler than his partner. But Kane's attention never left Christopher. You people always think you're so smart, moving into places where you don't belong. Sir, I work for the federal government. There's been a serious misunderstanding. Federal government? Kane's voice dripped mockery. What federal job? Maintenance? Janitorial services? Christopher forced himself to breathe slowly. Years of security training taught him to stay calm under pressure. I can show you identification. My badge is right there on the counter. Your badge? Kane laughed again. What are you, mall security? Other officers spread through the house. Boots thundered on hardwood floors. Pictures rattled on walls. The careful piece Christopher built shattered like glass. Daddy, Sophia cried from the stairs. It's okay, baby, Christopher called up, his voice breaking. Everything's going to be okay. Nothing's okay here, Kane snarled. This is what happens when people get ideas above their station. Christopher's neighbor, Mrs. Chun, peered through her window. Her Ring doorbell camera captured everything. The lack of warrant, the aggressive entry, weapons drawn on a man in pajamas. Check upstairs, Kane ordered. These people always hide something. Please, not in front of my children, Christopher pleaded. Your children. Kane's voice turned vicious. You should have thought about them before playing house in the suburbs. Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. Something felt wrong. The house was immaculate. Family photos lined the walls. Children's artwork hung on the refrigerator. This didn't match their intel. Detective, maybe we should. Maybe you should shut up and do your job. Kane cut him off. Christopher watched his daughter's terrified face. Watched his son cling to his mother. Watched armed strangers tear through the life he'd built. I'm reaching for my identification, Christopher announced clearly. It's on the counter beside the coffee maker. Don't move, Kane barked. You asked for identification. It's right there. Christopher's hand moved slowly toward the counter. Past his wallet. Past his car keys. Toward the leather case holding his federal credentials. I said don't move. But Christopher's fingers closed around the badge case. Opened it carefully. The gold Department of Homeland Security shield caught morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window. Kane's eyes followed the movement. His expression shifted from aggression to confusion to something approaching panic. The badge read, Christopher Bennett, Special Agent, Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity Division. The room fell silent except for Sophia's quiet sobbing upstairs. Kane stared at the badge, then at Christopher, then back at the badge. For the first time since entering Christopher's home, Detective Marcus Kane looked uncertain. This changed everything. The badge changed nothing and everything. Kane stared at the DHS credentials for 5 long seconds, then snapped the case shut with dismissive force. Fake, he declared. You can buy anything online these days. Detective, Rodriguez whispered urgently. That looked official. Federal seal, holographic security features. I don't care if it looks like the president's autograph, Kane snarled. We got a credible tip about this address. We follow through. But his voice carried less certainty now. His hands shook slightly as he holstered his weapon. Please verify my employment, Christopher said quietly, his voice controlled despite the rage burning in his chest. Call DHS headquarters. End this mistake before it gets worse. The only mistake, Kane replied, though his eyes wouldn't meet Christopher's, is thinking a fancy fake badge will save you. 23 minutes later, they left. No arrest. No apology. No explanation. Just boot prints on Christopher's hardwood floors, a splintered front door, and 2 traumatized children upstairs who'd watched their father held at gunpoint in his own home. Rebecca found Christopher sitting at the kitchen table an hour later, still in his pajamas, staring at his DHS badge. The kids won't come downstairs, she said softly. Sophia keeps asking if we're criminals. Nathan asked if we have to move. Christopher's jaw tightened. He pulled out his phone and dialed his DHS supervisor. Director Walsh, this is Christopher Bennett. I need to report an incident involving local law enforcement. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Walsh's voice grew progressively more tense as Christopher described the warrantless entry, the weapons drawn on his children, Kane's refusal to verify federal credentials. I'm contacting the Seattle Police Department immediately, Walsh said. This is unacceptable treatment of a federal agent. But Christopher knew better. He'd seen this pattern before, in briefings about domestic extremism, in reports about law enforcement bias, in statistics about how often complaints against police went nowhere. He filed an official complaint within the hour. Detailed documentation. Witness statements from Mrs. Chun. Ring camera footage showing the entire incident. The Seattle Police Department's response arrived 2 days later via email. Investigation concluded. Officers followed proper procedures based on credible intelligence received regarding suspicious activity at the residence. No policy violations identified. Case closed. No acknowledgement of the warrant issue. No mention of the DHS badge. No apology for terrorizing a federal agent's family. Captain James Hartley spoke to Como 4 News that evening, standing behind a podium with the Seattle PD logo prominent. Detective Kane is a 14-year veteran with an exemplary record, Hartley told the reporter with practiced sincerity. These allegations are completely without merit and appear motivated by anti-police sentiment. The reporter pressed. But sir, Mr. Bennett claims to be a federal agent with DHS. Have you verified his credentials? Hartley's expression didn't change. Anyone can buy a badge online these days. We see fraudulent credentials constantly. Our officers acted appropriately based on the information available to them. Christopher watched the news segment from his living room. Rebecca sat beside him, holding Sophia, who still flinched at unexpected sounds. They're calling you a liar on television, Rebecca said quietly. I know. Nathan appeared in the doorway, backpack over his shoulder. Dad, kids at school are asking questions. About the police cars. About whether we're criminals. Christopher's heart broke a little more. What did you tell them? That you work for the government. That you're one of the good guys. Nathan's voice cracked. But nobody believes me. The neighborhood divided with brutal efficiency. Mrs. Chun brought over a casserole and offered to testify about what she'd witnessed. That detective never asked for a warrant. Never announced himself properly. I recorded everything. But the Hendersons across the street suddenly avoided eye contact during evening walks. The Johnsons 2 houses down posted a thin blue line flagged the next day. A clear message about where their loyalties lay. Supporting our boys in blue, Mr. Johnson told anyone who'd listen. Some people need to learn respect for law enforcement instead of making false accusations. Christopher's supervisor called that same afternoon. There have been inquiries about your employment status, Director Walsh said carefully. From Seattle PD. Questions about your legitimacy, your security clearance. What kind of questions? Whether your credentials are authentic. Whether you've been truthful about your federal service. Walsh paused uncomfortably. I assured them everything is verified and current, naturally. But what? But perhaps you should consider taking some personal time. Let this situation resolve itself quietly. Christopher felt something cold settle in his stomach. Are you suggesting I'm a security risk? I'm suggesting that controversy isn't helpful for anyone in our line of work. Negative attention raises questions. Questions lead to reviews. The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Even with 12 years of federal service. Even with top secret clearance that required FBI background investigations. Even with credentials verified through multiple government databases. One racist detective's assumptions could poison everything. Como 4 ran a follow-up story 3 days later. Local homeowner claims police harassment. The segment included Hartley's dismissive comments and grainy footage from Mrs. Chen's doorbell camera. But the angle didn't capture the DHS badge clearly. Convenient, Hartley told the reporter with a slight smile. No actual proof of federal employment visible in the footage. That night, Christopher sat at his kitchen counter. The same spot where Kane had first dismissed his badge. His coffee grew cold while he stared at his phone. Rebecca found him there at midnight. Come to bed. They're questioning everything. Christopher's voice was hollow. My job. My clearance. My right to live here. We have documentation. We have proof. Do we? Christopher looked up at his wife. When was the last time you heard of anyone believing a black man over a white cop? But something shifted the next morning. Christopher's phone rang before dawn. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer. Mr. Bennett, this is Special Agent Victoria Park, FBI Office of Professional Responsibility. We understand there was an incident involving a federal employee and local law enforcement. Christopher sat up straight. Yes, ma'am. We'd like to discuss this matter with you today. In detail. The Seattle Police Department says my credentials are fake. Mr. Bennett, Agent Park's voice carried steel, we've verified your employment status with DHS. Your top secret clearance. Your 12 years of federal service. Someone is going to answer for dismissing a federal agent's credentials and terrorizing his family. Across town, Captain Hartley received a different kind of phone call. Captain Hartley, this is Special Agent Park with the FBI. We need to schedule an immediate meeting regarding Detective Kane's conduct during a recent incident. Hartley's coffee mug stopped halfway to his lips. I'm sorry, which incident? The unlawful search of DHS Special Agent Christopher Bennett's residence. We'll be there this afternoon with the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Hartley hung up and immediately called Kane. Marcus, we have a problem. A big federal problem. What kind of problem? The FBI kind. That badge you said was fake. It's real. Very real. And now we have federal investigators asking why you raided a DHS agent's home without a warrant. For the first time in 14 years, Detective Marcus Kane felt genuinely afraid. Special Agent Victoria Park arrived at Seattle Police Headquarters carrying a leather briefcase that would destroy careers. She walked into Captain Hartley's office at precisely 2 p.m., flanked by Agent Michael Torres from the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. Behind them, a federal stenographer set up recording equipment. No plaisanteries. No small talk. Christopher Bennett, Park began, opening her briefcase with crisp efficiency, has held top secret clearance with the Department of Homeland Security for 12 years. His current assignment involves protecting critical infrastructure networks, power grids, water systems, transportation hubs, the kind of systems that keep this city functioning. Hartley shifted in his chair. We received intelligence suggesting. You received what exactly? Park interrupted. Because according to your dispatch records, Detective Kane requested authorization for 847 Riverside Heights Lane based on an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. She spread documents across Hartley's desk like evidence at a crime scene. Employment verification from DHS. Security clearance confirmation from the FBI. Federal service records showing exemplary performance reviews. Commendations for work on cybersecurity initiatives that you'll never hear about because they're classified. Park pulled out another document. Your detective told Como 4 News that anyone can buy a badge online. This particular badge requires FBI background investigation, polygraph examination, fingerprint verification through multiple federal databases, and congressional notification for his clearance level. Hartley stared at the paperwork, his face losing color. Furthermore, Agent Torres added, consulting his tablet, your dispatch records show the original tip referenced 847 Riverside Heights Lane. Detective Kane raided 847 Riverside Heights Avenue. Wrong street entirely. A clerical error, Hartley began. A clerical error that resulted in federal agent intimidation. Park cut him off. Which falls under FBI jurisdiction. Detective Kane held weapons on a federal employee's children. He refused to verify credentials when presented. He publicly questioned the legitimacy of a DHS agent on local television. The power dynamic in the room shifted like tectonic plates. Hartley, who'd spent 3 days defending Kane on television, now faced federal investigators documenting his department's incompetence, or worse. Park pulled out her phone. Director Morrison? Agent Park. Yes, sir. We've confirmed the incident involved DHS Special Agent Bennett. Full federal employee protections apply. Recommand immédiate intervention. Hartley could hear the voice on the other end, authoritative, displeased, unmistakably federal. Mr. Bennett's family will receive full victim services support, Park announced. Detective Kane will answer federal questions about civil rights violations under color of law. And this department will explain why an anonymous tip about the wrong address justified terrorizing a federal agent's children. Outside Hartley's office, Kane paced the hallway. His union representative, Gary Mitchell, tried to project confidence. They can't do anything without evidence, Mitchell insisted. It's your word against his. Internal affairs will protect you. But when Park emerged from Hartley's office, she walked directly to Kane. Detective Kane, I'm Special Agent Park, FBI. You need to come with us for questioning regarding federal civil rights violations. Kane's face went white. I want my union rep present. That's your right. But understand, this isn't an internal affairs inquiry. This is a federal investigation into whether you violated Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law, that carries 10 years in federal prison. Mitchell's confident expression evaporated. Meanwhile, Christopher's phone rang with a different kind of news. Mr. Bennett, this is Agent Park. Your federal employment status has been verified and communicated to Seattle PD. Director Walsh at DHS has been informed that any administrative action against you based on this incident would constitute retaliation against a federal employee exercising his civil rights. Christopher sat in his car outside Nathan's school, hands trembling. What does that mean? It means Detective Kane no longer gets to decide whether your credentials are legitimate. The Federal Bureau of Investigation does. And we've confirmed you're exactly who you said you are. For 3 days, Christopher had been treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood. His children were afraid to sleep in their own rooms. His wife jumped at every unexpected sound. His career had been threatened through bureaucratic whispers. Agent Park, what happens now? Now, Mr. Bennett, people start facing consequences for their actions. That evening, Como 4 News led with a different story. Federal investigation launched into Seattle police raid, the anchor announced. FBI confirms homeowner is legitimate DHS agent with top-secret clearance. The same reporter who'd questioned Christopher's credentials now stood outside Seattle PD headquarters. Captain Hartley, the FBI has verified that Christopher Bennett is a federal agent. Your department publicly questioned his credentials on this network 3 days ago. How do you explain this discrepancy? Hartley faced the camera with visible discomfort. We are cooperating fully with federal investigators. If procedural errors occurred, we will address them through appropriate channels. Captain, you didn't say if errors occurred. You said if. The FBI says Detective Kane raided the wrong address entirely. That's not an error. That's negligence that traumatized a federal employee's family. No further comment at this time. But the damage was done. The narrative had flipped completely. Christopher Bennett wasn't a suspicious character who didn't belong in his neighborhood. He was a federal cybersecurity specialist whose constitutional rights were violated by local police who refused to verify his credentials. Detective Kane watched the news from his living room, beer growing warm in his hand. His phone had been ringing all evening. Other officers asking questions. Friends expressing concern. His wife wondering why FBI agents wanted to interview him. 3 days ago, he'd controlled the situation. Badge. Gun. Authority. Christopher Bennett was just another suspect who needed to learn his place. Now Kane faced federal civil rights investigators who didn't care about his 14 years of service or his arrest statistics. They cared about one question. Why did he raid a DHS agent's home without a warrant, then publicly dismiss federal credentials when confronted with his mistake? Kane didn't have a good answer. His union rep had been confident that internal affairs would protect him. That's how it always worked. Officers investigated officers, complaints got dismissed, life continued. But the FBI didn't answer to Seattle PD. The Department of Justice didn't care about union contracts. Federal prosecutors didn't negotiate with local police who violated civil rights. Kane pulled out his phone and scrolled through his text messages from the day of the raid. His conversation with Officer Davis from 2 weeks earlier stared back at him. Kane, another uppity family moved into Riverside Heights. Time for a wellness check. Davis, anonymous tip incoming. These people need to understand their place. Kane, you read my mind. He deleted these messages from his phone the day after the raid. But Kane didn't know that federal investigators had already obtained them through a subpoena to his cell provider. Every text, every call, every piece of evidence showing premeditation and racial bias. The hunters had become the hunted. Christopher received another call that night from Agent Park. Mr. Bennett, I need to ask you something. Have there been other incidents in your neighborhood? Other families experiencing similar treatment? Christopher thought about the Martinez family 3 houses down. They'd moved out suddenly 6 months ago. About the Johnson family, different Johnsons, black family, who'd left after repeated wellness checks. I think so. But people don't talk about it. They just leave. We need to speak with them. All of them. Because if this is a pattern, it's not just about your case anymore. What do you mean? I mean Detective Kane's personnel file shows 14 complaints in 5 years. All dismissed. All involving minority families in affluent neighborhoods. All marked unfounded by the same captain who just defended him on television. Christopher's stomach dropped. This has happened before. We believe so. And if we can prove a pattern, this becomes a federal civil rights case. Not just against Kane, against the entire system that protected him. That night, Christopher didn't sleep. He lay in bed thinking about all the families who'd suffered in silence, who'd moved away quietly rather than fight, who'd accepted that the system wasn't built to protect them. But he also thought about Mrs. Chun, who'd recorded everything and offered to testify. About Agent Park, who'd verified his credentials when his own supervisor suggested he take personal time. About the FBI agents who were treating this as a federal crime instead of an internal matter. The system had failed him. But another system, federal law, constitutional protections, civil rights enforcement, was beginning to work. Sometimes justice required someone with enough privilege, enough credentials, enough federal backing to force the system to acknowledge what it had been ignoring. Christopher Bennett was that someone. And he wasn't running anymore. Special Agent Park's investigation exploded beyond Christopher's case within 48 hours. The FBI conference room in downtown Seattle filled with boxes labeled Riverside Heights Investigation. Each box contained complaints that Seattle PD had marked unfounded or unsubstantiated. Each complaint told the same story. Pull Detective Kane's complete personnel file, Park instructed her team. Every complaint, every use of force report, every incident involving minorities in affluent neighborhoods for the past 5 years. The file arrived within hours. It was damning. March 2020. Excessive force complaint from Marcus Williams. Dismissed. Williams described being thrown to the ground during a traffic stop in his own driveway. Williams was a black software engineer at Microsoft. No arrest made. Complaint marked insufficient evidence by Captain Hartley. August 2021. Civil rights complaint from the Rodriguez family. Dismissed. Maria Rodriguez, a physician at Seattle Children's Hospital, described officers searching her home without a warrant, claiming they smelled marijuana. No drugs found. Complaint marked conflicting statements by Hartley. January 2023. Use of force incident involving James Foster. Dismissed. Foster, a black attorney at a downtown firm, described being pepper sprayed while handcuffed during a wellness check. No charges filed. Foster declined to press charges after consultation with his firm's senior partners. Complaint marked resolved through mediation. June 2024. Harassment complaint from the Thompson family. Dismissed. Diana Thompson, a black high school principal, described 3 random traffic stops within 2 weeks, all in her neighborhood. Complaint marked routine patrol activity. See the pattern? Park showed the files to Agent Torres. Same detective. Different victims. All minorities. All professionals with careers that contradict Kane's stereotypes. All dismissed by the same captain. Torres pulled up email records recovered through federal subpoena. Look at this. Internal communication between Kane and Officer Davis 2 weeks before the Bennett raid. The email thread made Park's blood run cold. Kane to Davis, December 28, 2024. Another tech worker family moving into Riverside Heights. House sold for $1.2 million. You know what to do. Davis to Kane, December 29, 2024. Anonymous tip filed for next month. Suspicious activity, possible drug dealing. Standard procedure. Kane to Davis, December 29, 2024. Perfect. These people need to learn where they belong. They planned it, Torres breathed. Systematic harassment based on racial demographics. Park opened another file. The department's federal grant applications. Here's why. Seattle PD receives $3.4 million annually in federal funding tied to arrest statistics and proactive policing in high-value neighborhoods. The grant specifically rewards departments that increase enforcement in areas with changing demographics. She highlighted a section. Departments demonstrating proactive intervention in communities experiencing rapid demographic shifts will receive priority consideration for supplemental funding. Translation, Torres said darkly. Arrest more minorities in white neighborhoods, get more federal money. The financial incentive was undeniable. Each suspicious activity, raid in Riverside Heights, contributed to statistics that justified millions in federal grants. Park's team expanded the investigation. Phone records showed coordination between multiple officers. Text messages revealed planning sessions for targeting specific addresses. Body camera footage, previously dismissed as technical malfunctions, got federal digital forensic analysis. The recovered footage told Christopher's story and a dozen others. August 2023, the Martinez family. Officers stormed their home claiming odor complaints. No warrant. No drugs found. Children traumatized. Maria Martinez, an emergency room physician, filed a complaint. Dismissed by Hartley as unfounded. October 2023, the Jackson family. Anonymous tip about loud music results in a 6 a.m. SWAT response. No noise violations found. Robert Jackson, a Boeing engineer, filed a complaint. Dismissed as proper response to credible threat. December 2023, the Foster family. Wellness check with tactical gear at 5 a.m. No emergency found. James Foster, the attorney, filed a complaint. Later withdrawn after his law firm suggested it would affect partnership considerations. Each incident followed an identical pattern. Anonymous tip. Aggressive response. Minority family. Professional careers that contradicted Kane's assumptions about who belonged in expensive neighborhoods. How many families? Park asked. 17 documented incidents in Riverside Heights alone, Torres reported. Probably more in other neighborhoods. These are just the ones who filed complaints before giving up. Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist for the Seattle Times, received a call from her FBI source. Sarah, you need to see this. Federal investigation into systematic civil rights violations. Multiple families. Pattern of harassment spanning 4 years. How many families? At least 17 that we can document. Professional careers. Stable families. American dream achievers who became police targets because they didn't fit Detective Kane's demographic expectations. Mitchell's investigation revealed the broader context. Federal grants tied to arrest statistics created perverse incentives for officers to manufacture probable cause in affluent minority neighborhoods. The math is brutal, Mitchell explained to her editor. Each raid in a high-value demographic area contributes to statistics that justify millions in federal funding. Successful minority families became revenue generators. But the most damaging evidence came from Kane's personal communications, recovered through NSA domestic security protocols triggered when a federal employee was threatened. Kane to his wife, January 15, 2025, 11:47 p.m. Taught another uppity family a lesson today. Government worker with a fake badge. Probably affirmative action hire anyway. Wife to Kane. Be careful, Marcus. These people sometimes have real connections. Kane to wife. Connections? Please. I've been doing this for 14 years. Nobody questions my judgment. The racial animus, documented in writing. Federal prosecutor's dream. Agent Park compiled the evidence into a presentation for the Department of Justice. This isn't just about Christopher Bennett anymore, she told her team. This is systematic deprivation of civil rights under color of law affecting at least 17 families over 4 years. Detective Kane operated a harassment campaign designed to drive successful minority families out of affluent neighborhoods. Ethnic cleansing through law enforcement, Torres said quietly. Exactly. And Captain Hartley enabled it by dismissing every complaint. We're not just prosecuting Kane. We're prosecuting the system that protected him. The evidence expanded beyond Seattle. Similar patterns emerged in Bellevue, Redmond, and Kirkland. Professional minority families. Anonymous tips. Aggressive responses. Dismissed complaints. Dr. Angela Chun, criminology professor at University of Washington, reviewed the FBI data. This represents textbook institutional racism, she testified. Systematic targeting based on racial demographics, justified through fabricated probable cause, protected through administrative dismissal of legitimate complaints, all incentivized by federal grants tied to arrest statistics. The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division officially opened a pattern and practice investigation into Seattle Police Department. This triggered federal oversight authority that local officials couldn't dismiss or ignore. Christopher received official notification. Federal investigation confirms systematic civil rights violations affecting multiple families. Your case has been designated as the primary incident in a broader pattern and practice investigation. Full victim services support authorized. Federal protection extended to all witnesses. But the investigation revealed something else. Something that would end Kane's career and send shockwaves through law enforcement nationwide. The NSA's domestic security monitoring had captured everything. Every text message, every email, every phone call about targeting federal employees. Kane didn't just face local accountability anymore. He faced federal terrorism charges under the Patriot Act for systematic intimidation of federal employees based on racial bias. The penalty? Up to 25 years in federal prison. Detective Marcus Kane had spent 14 years terrorizing families with impunity, protected by a system that valued arrest statistics over constitutional rights. Now the full weight of federal law enforcement was coming for him, and there was nowhere left to hide. Sarah Mitchell's phone exploded with messages after her first article ran. Seattle Times headline: Federal investigation reveals systematic police harassment of minority families in affluent neighborhoods. By noon, Mitchell had 17 voicemails from families with identical stories. Maria Martinez called first. Ms. Mitchell, I read your article about the Bennett family. The exact same thing happened to us. We thought we were alone. By evening, Mitchell's conference room at the Seattle Times looked like a federal evidence locker. 17 families. 17 stories. One pattern. It's not just Christopher Bennett, Mitchell told her editor. It's a systematic campaign targeting successful minority families across 4 police districts. The story went viral within hours. #Riverside targeting trended on Twitter. Facebook groups formed overnight. TikTok videos from affected families garnered millions of views. But the real breakthrough came when Mrs. Chun, Christopher's neighbor, organized a community meeting. She posted a video to her neighborhood Facebook group that went viral. I'm Helen Chen. I've lived in Riverside Heights for 32 years. I watched Detective Kane terrorize the Bennett family in their own home. I watched him refuse to verify federal credentials. I watched him traumatize children who'd done nothing wrong. And I'm done staying silent. The video got 340,000 views in 12 hours. Riverside Heights Community Center couldn't contain the crowd that showed up Thursday evening. Christopher arrived expecting maybe 30 supporters. Instead, he found over 400 people packed into every available space. News cameras lined the back wall. FBI agents stood quietly in corners, taking notes. Maria Martinez spoke first, her voice shaking but determined. They came to our house at 5:47 a.m. No warrant. No explanation. Just guns pointed at my children while they screamed in terror. I'm an emergency room physician. I save lives for a living. And Detective Kane treated me like a drug dealer in my own home. Robert Jackson followed. I'm a senior engineer at Boeing. I pay $52,000 annually in property taxes. And the police treated me like a criminal in my own driveway because I'm a black man in an expensive neighborhood. Diana Thompson delivered the most powerful testimony. I'm a high school principal. I spend my career teaching students about justice, fairness, and constitutional rights. How do I explain to them that the police targeted my family, terrorized my teenage daughter, because we're successful while black? Story after story, pattern after pattern. 17 families who'd thought they were isolated incidents, now realizing they were part of a systematic campaign. Harold Chun, Helen's husband, a retired attorney, provided legal context. What Detective Kane did wasn't rogue policing. It was a coordinated strategy. The evidence shows planning, financial incentives through federal grants, and administrative protection from Captain Hartley. This is institutional racism with a budget line item. Christopher spoke last, his voice steady but emotional. 3 weeks ago, I was ready to resign from DHS. Pack up my family. Move somewhere else. Run away from the fight because I was terrified for my children. He paused, looking at the packed room. But there is no somewhere else if we don't fight here. If we don't stand together. If we let systematic racism win through our silence. The applause lasted 3 full minutes. Agent Park appeared at the back of the room during Christopher's speech. Afterward, she approached him with news that changed everything. Mr. Bennett, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division has officially expanded the investigation. We're examining every complaint dismissed by Captain Hartley over the past 5 years. Every anonymous tip that led to raids in minority neighborhoods. Every federal grant application tied to arrest statistics. What does that mean? It means Seattle PD is under formal federal oversight effective immediately. Captain Hartley answers to federal monitors. Detective Kane faces federal civil rights charges. And every family here qualifies for victim compensation. Mitchell's follow-up article ran the next morning. DOJ launches pattern and practice investigation. 17 families confirmed systematic harassment. The narrative shift was complete. This wasn't about one family's complaint anymore. It was about exposing institutional racism that had operated for years under the protection of federal grant incentives. Community organizing happened at digital speed. A coalition formed within days. Riverside Heights Justice Coalition. They created a website documenting every incident. They hired civil rights attorneys. They organized protests at Seattle PD headquarters. Most importantly, they refused to stay silent. Dr. Angela Chun, the UW criminology professor, appeared on local news to explain the academic context. What we're seeing in Seattle represents a nationwide problem. Federal grants that reward arrest statistics in high-value demographics create financial incentives for racial profiling. Detective Kane isn't an isolated bad apple. He's a symptom of a system that monetizes racism. The federal investigation expanded beyond Seattle. Similar patterns emerged in Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Professional minority families. Anonymous tips. Aggressive responses. Dismissed complaints. Federal grants tied to arrest statistics. Christopher's case became a catalyst for national reform discussions. But the most significant development came when the NSA declassified portions of its domestic monitoring related to threats against federal employees. The evidence was devastating. Text messages showing Kane and other officers coordinating harassment campaigns. Emails discussing financial bonuses tied to arrests in changing neighborhoods. Recorded phone calls where officers laughed about terrorizing families who didn't belong. Federal prosecutors called it a conspiracy. The community called it what it was. Domestic terrorism designed to maintain racial segregation through police intimidation. And Detective Marcus Kane was at the center of it all. His arraignment was scheduled for the following week. Federal charges. Deprivation of rights under color of law. Conspiracy against rights. Intimidation of federal employees. Maximum sentence. 25 years in federal prison. The badge Kane had used to terrorize families for 14 years would now send him to prison. Justice was coming. And this time, there was nowhere to hide. February 3, 2025. United States District Court, Western District of Washington. The federal courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Every seat filled. People standing along the walls. Media credentials from 23 news organizations. Court TV broadcasting live. Detective Marcus Kane sat at the defense table in an ill-fitting civilian suit, his police union attorney beside him. He'd aged 10 years in 3 weeks. The swagger was gone, replaced by the hollow-eyed fear of a man watching his life collapse in real time. U.S. District Judge Patricia Morrison presided, stern, methodical, unimpressed by police union politics. Mr. Kane, Judge Morrison began, you stand accused of violating Title 18, Section 242 of the United States Code, deprivation of rights under color of law. Additionally, conspiracy against rights, intimidation of federal employees, and making false statements to federal investigators. How do you plead? Kane's attorney stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. But the evidence spoke differently. Federal prosecutor Amanda Richards presented the government's case with surgical precision. Your Honor, the United States will prove that Detective Kane operated a systematic campaign of racial harassment spanning 4 years. 17 families targeted. 43 warrantless raids. All based on fabricated anonymous tips. All involving minority families in affluent neighborhoods. All protected by Captain Hartley's administrative dismissals. Richards pulled up the first exhibit on the courtroom screens. Kane's text messages to Officer Davis. Another uppity family moving into Riverside Heights. Time for a wellness check. These people need to understand their place. The courtroom murmured. Kane stared at his hands. The defendant didn't make mistakes, Richards continued. He executed a plan. A plan incentivized by federal grants tied to arrest statistics. A plan that generated $487,000 in supplemental funding for Seattle PD, based on increased enforcement in changing demographic areas. She displayed the financial records. Each raid in Riverside Heights corresponded with increased federal grant allocations. The math was undeniable. Christopher testified on day 3. Calm. Factual. Devastating. Detective Kane entered my home without a warrant. Held weapons on my 8-year-old son. Refused to verify my DHS credentials when I showed him my federal badge. Then went on television and called me a fraud. Kane's attorney cross-examined aggressively. Mr. Bennett, isn't it true you were argumentative with Detective Kane? I asserted my constitutional rights. That's not argumentative, that's citizenship. You refused to cooperate with a legitimate police investigation. There was no legitimate investigation. There was no warrant. There was no probable cause. There was racial profiling based on Detective Kane's assumption that a black family couldn't afford to live in my neighborhood. The defense had no response. Maria Martinez testified next. Robert Jackson, Diana Thompson, James Foster. One by one, 17 families told identical stories. The pattern was undeniable. Agent Park presented the NSA surveillance evidence. Every text, every email, every recorded conversation showing premeditation and coordination. The defense tried to suppress it. Judge Morrison denied the motion. The Patriot Act explicitly authorizes monitoring of communications when federal employees are threatened. Mr. Kane's systematic intimidation of DHS Special Agent Bennett triggered legitimate national security protocols. Captain Hartley testified under immunity, trying to save himself. I trusted Detective Kane's judgment. I had no knowledge of any systematic targeting. Richards destroyed him with his own emails. Hartley to Kane, March 2024. Keep pressure on these newcomers. Property values depend on maintaining neighborhood standards. Hartley to Kane, August 2023. Federal grants reward proactive policing in changing demographics. Your arrest statistics in Riverside Heights are exemplary. The jury heard everything, saw everything, understood everything. Deliberations lasted 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Kane's face went blank. His attorney slumped. In the gallery, 17 families exhaled relief they'd held for years. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Morrison didn't mince words. Mr. Kane, in 28 years on this bench, I have never seen such a clear abuse of police authority combined with racial animus. You didn't just violate Christopher Bennett's rights. You weaponized your badge to terrorize 17 families based solely on the color of their skin. She opened the sentencing guidelines. The federal sentencing guidelines recommend 12 to 15 years. But this case warrants an upward departure. Your crimes were systematic, premeditated, financially motivated, and you showed absolutely no remorse until facing federal prosecution. Kane's hands trembled. I sentence you to 22 years in federal prison. No parole. No early release. You will serve every day of this sentence at a federal correctional institution. Additionally, you are permanently barred from any law enforcement position in the United States. Upon release, you will complete 5 years of supervised probation with mandatory community service in minority communities. Kane's wife sobbed in the gallery. His attorney requested reconsideration. Denied. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, I am ordering you to pay $340,000 in restitution to the 17 families you terrorized. This represents the federal grant money your department received based on your fraudulent arrest statistics. The poetic justice was perfect. Kane's racism had generated $340,000 in federal grants. Now that money would compensate his victims. Captain Hartley received a separate sentence. 8 years for conspiracy and obstruction. Loss of pension. Permanent le renforcement ban. Outside the courthouse, Christopher stood before news cameras surrounded by the 17 families. Today, federal justice proved that no badge places anyone above the Constitution, he said quietly. No uniform grants permission to terrorize American families based on racial bias. No grant money justifies domestic terrorism. The crowd behind him, over 500 people, erupted in applause. Sarah Mitchell's final article ran that evening. Federal judge sentences ex-detective to 22 years in systematic civil rights case. Seattle PD under federal oversight for minimum 5 years. But the real victory wasn't Kane's sentence. It was the reforms. Seattle Police Department operated under comprehensive federal consent decree. Mandatory body cameras, always on. Independent civilian oversight board with subpoena power. Elimination of arrest quota-based federal grants. Mandatory bias training every quarter. Automatic federal review of any complaint involving racial profiling. Community policing partnerships with minority neighborhoods. Within 6 months. Use of force incidents, down 47%. Civilian complaints, down 58%. Community trust in police, up 41%. Minority recruitment, up 67%. 17 families stayed in their homes. No more midnight harassment. No more anonymous tips. No more children asking why police hated them. Christopher returned to his DHS position with full security clearance restored. His supervisor personally apologized. His colleagues treated him as someone who'd stood up to domestic terrorism and won. Nathan and Sophia slowly healed. They still flinched sometimes at unexpected knocks. But they learned that justice, though slow, could work. That courage mattered. That their father fought back and won. 2 years later, Christopher stood in his front yard, watering the roses Rebecca had planted. The same yard where Kane had terrorized his family. But now it felt like home again. Mrs. Chun waved from next door. Beautiful morning, Christopher. Beautiful indeed, Helen. Nathan and Sophia played basketball in the driveway. Rebecca hummed in the kitchen. Normal suburban rhythms restored. Christopher's DHS badge sat on the kitchen counter. No longer something to be questioned, but something that had changed a system. Sometimes one family's courage to fight back creates change for thousands. Sometimes a badge means everything, not because of the authority it grants, but because of the justice it demands. And sometimes the system works. Not perfectly, not quickly, but eventually. Christopher Bennett proved that truth still matters. That credentials deserve verification. That constitutional rights apply to everyone. No one stands above the law, not even those sworn to enforce it.